Hey, everybody, and welcome to another conversation with the Midnight Citizen. Now, I know it's not midnight while we're doing this, but it's as close as I'm going to get to midnight today, which is around 8 p.m., so the sun's going down. It actually looks much darker out your window than it does out mine right now. I don't know why that would be, but I guess you're a number of miles to the east of me, so your sunset is happening while mine is not. But anyway, it's Mike Booty. Hey, Mike.
Hey, yeah, we have a big old series of storms coming through right now. That's why it's much darker than it usually is.
Yeah. If we lose you, we'll know why.
Mm-hmm. I shouldn't be. I honestly, that's one of the benefits of living next to a hospital. I live next to the city's biggest hospital. And so we almost never lose power over here. So
I was going to say they always have the machines going that go bing. I have to keep running. No matter what, so that's a Monty Python reference, by the way. But anyway.
No, I don't know. I know some Monty Python. I know the wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Say no more. Say no more.
Yeah, and the lumberjack and all that stuff. But I was never really a great big fan of Monty Python. I obviously I grew up watching bits of Flying Circus whenever you could get them on television here. And obviously, Search for the Holy Grail, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
It was a big deal. Yeah, that was every time we would have a church lock-in, they would lock the doors so you couldn't get out.
And they would play Holy Grail for you, really?
Oh, yeah, we played. Yeah, that was basically the excuse to go to those church functions. When I grew up in the mid-'90s, is to watch Holy Grail. You knew that somebody was always going to sneak it in. So.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting. I would have never thought that would, considering that the meaning of life. Or not the meaning of life, but Life of Brian is, goes over very little with the church crowd because of the false prophet aspect of everything.
It does, but again, this was Holy Grail. Holy Grail was just its own thing, and I don't really know if anybody knew all of that. I didn't know certainly at first that Monty Python was a whole other thing. I was so confused why that title, Monty Python and the Search for the Holy. I was what is Monty Python? And I didn't learn about it until, probably early high school when I actually did start renting their other movies. And Life of Brian was one that definitely, had an impact on me for a very brief, period of time. But I never really stayed with them that much. I love John Cleese's acting work, Fish Called Wanda. Yeah, so good. But other than that, so I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. Interesting, because so you and I are not the same age. I'm a bit older than you are, but when I was young, so Monty Python was played on the PBS station,
right.
And it was well after it was in the UK, right? But they played it every Sunday. And just a weird aside, I was a young kid, not even probably even 10 years old or anything, and I literally thought it was going to be a circus. And I told my brother, who was older, I go, "We got to stay up and watch this circus." And he's like, "Yeah, whatever." He's older.
Did you not pay attention to the flying part of it too? Did you?
Well, I just assumed they did a lot of trapeze work.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, yeah.
And then we watched it, and it was, hilariously weird.
Yeah.
And I was hooked, and I'm like, oh, it's not a circus. So many things in my life, I am totally wrong on the context at the beginning. And then I end up falling into things that I like a lot.
Right.
Based on very bad information.
Yeah. What is the British origin of Flying Circus? Do you have any idea what that means?
I have no idea. I think I used to have... I had all the scripts, right? So they put out a book called the Monty Python and all the scripts or something like that. And then I read that and in college, and they had little bits of information in between there. And I believe Eric Idle came up with Monty Python as a name. They didn't want it to be any one of them, right? Because they were, more of a group. But I don't know who came up with Flying Circus. I don't remember that from the book. But
yeah.
I think it was just kind of absurdist, very absurdist humor.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes along with that. Because, I mean, they had, you know, Dinsdale, and they had all these weird, you know, Mrs. Nesbitt and all these kind of weird names.
Right.
So Monty Python was just another weird name,
Right.
in a bunch of weird names.
Yeah.
My pet fish, Eric. You know.
Yeah, I didn't know anything at all about Flying Circus until I think they would occasionally play them on. So I was just like a background, so as a reference, I was born in '82. So you know, kind of I don't know.
That's probably when I watched them.
Right, and they call my there's this sociologist who wrote a book a while back, and I think he coined the term elder millennial, which I
elder millennial.
Yeah, basically describe.
They love to make up words, don't they?
It makes us sound old. It makes us sound older than anybody who was born before '82 somehow. It's like makes you sound millennial. It makes you sound old and also young, like you don't know anything at the same time. You know, so I love that. But yeah, so when I first became aware of Flying Circus when I was working at Suncoast Video. So I worked at Suncoast in like my sophomore to junior year of high school, and so we sold pretty much exclusively. I've talked to Chad Bowers about this. That was like the only place in town where you could get Flying Circus and you could get like Dragon Ball Z. Yeah. So that was just.
Chad worked on Dragon Ball Z.
He did. That's why I've talked to him.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I said to him, you were kind of the reason I had a job in high school. Like, thank you. You know, so that's great. Yeah. I'm a member now of on like a Facebook. There's like there's a group for people who used to work at Suncoast, and I didn't work there nearly as long as a lot of other people. I was only there for like a very short amount of time. Like I think I've worked there for 6 months in total, but it was enough. I feel like I have some credentials for having work there, because it was kind of like the premier place to get overpriced videotapes.
So it's interesting because that's a point in time that is gone and will never return, right? So I worked in a video store. I didn't work at Suncoast. I worked at like a neighborhood rental, video rental place for about almost 2 years, I guess. And during that time period, I mean, it was, to me, looking back on it, and I'll ask you the question, it was magical. It was a magical time to be young and working in something that everybody was interested in.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Like after I worked at Suncoast, like later on that summer, I got a job at Blockbuster to kind of every job that I've ever worked at, by the way, is now obsolete. It's gone. Like it's like once I worked there, if you want to like destroy your business, hire Mike Moody. It took a while after I quit for Blockbuster to shut down, but I did work at Blockbuster, and the one thing I regret is that like I was kind of there at the very end of like the mom and pop era. So like in the town where I grew up, there were several video stores, and they were almost all mom and pop, with the exception of one that was in a gas station, and they were the ones that had all the video games that we would rent. So like, and I wish I would have kind of worked there, because it seemed like that was a place where you sort of had some control over the inventory. There was like a little bit more individuality that went into it. And when I worked at Blockbuster in 2000, 2001, there was like a lot of conversation about how great it used to be from like kind of the people I worked with who were like management, who had been there for a while. And you just kind of got the sense that already they were kind of like quaking in their boots a little bit about the future of video stores.
They saw where it was going. Huh?
Yeah, I think they did. And again, it was like there were just so many, like pay-per-view, I think, kind of made them really nervous. And obviously with Netflix coming out around what was it, 2004 or 5 or something like that. But yeah, it honestly was just like a great experience. Like I used to go to video stores constantly, and just I probably annoyed them so much, because when a tape came out, it was like all I could think about that day at school, and just hoping that you would get home and your mom would get home from work and she would like sense the urgency in your voice to like take you down to the video store to get like Jurassic Park on opening night.
Right. Yeah.
I was just saying that like Jurassic Park came out, and I just wanted that tape so much. And I knew that it was going to be, my mom didn't understand that it was like the hottest movie and people have been waiting a year and a half for it to come out on videotape. And so we got down there, and it was like we went down there, and I just raced back to the back of the store, and I don't know if they had these where you were, but like they would have obviously the tape there, the actual retail box, and then behind it was like the clamshell that you would get.
Right.
And all of them were just like empty, everything until the very, very last one. So that was basically like my entire life. And like when my mom couldn't get home in time to take me down to work, in the years before I drove, it was like constantly calling at the store and just like bothering people who worked there. It's like, do you have Tim Allen and the Santa Claus? It's like 5 minutes later, do you have Tim Allen and the Santa Claus? It's like, I can't believe that they didn't. They just, I don't know. I guess it was also they just didn't have caller ID or something.
Well, I was gonna say they didn't have caller ID.
Yeah, but I don't know. If I was working at the video store, I would have been like, what's your name and number, kid? I tell you what.
Yeah, quit calling here.
Yeah, if it
I'm gonna block you.
Exactly. If it comes in, you'll be the first one I call. So stop calling. Okay, relax. It's okay. You'll live to see another day.
I worked in the age of tags, so they had those little round tags that would hang, and they were color coded for VHS and Beta, if you can believe it. Yeah. And VHS and Beta for regular movies, and then there was a special color for the not ready for prime time movies that they had in the little saloon doors.
Films. Yeah.
Because you're in the wholesome era of video rental, and I was in the scumbag era where they just made money. Yeah, where we had X-rated tapes and what have you. So, right. But the funny thing is, you talk about that, but I had people when I worked there. And maybe Blockbuster, I don't know if the same experience, because at the mom and pop, people, it was a little bit less corporate, and so, I mean, they would, harass me to hide stuff for them and keep stuff at the back and everything. and for my friends, I would do it. Right. Yeah. So I would be like, yeah, don't worry. I'm going to be in there. I've got to work whatever shift I was working. I'll be in there. I'll pull one and I'll set it up. Everybody who worked there had their own little hiding places. Yeah. And then when your friends showed up, you'd get them their video. So. Right.
And that is kind of funny. I sort of experienced that a little bit when I worked at Suncoast, because I was 16, and so I definitely had we sold special interest tapes, which is like the adult films.
Oh, they call them special interest then?
Yeah, they call them special interest. So, but that was a broad category. So they would literally sell Bob Vila tapes like right next to.
Oh, Bob Vila's with the special interest.
Yeah, he is. They categorized it, but they didn't cover Bob Vila up with like a little sort of opaque box. Like they would have they would have a thing they would put in front of the tapes and all that.
Brown paper bag. Yeah, that's funny.
Like, hey, listen, man, I know, and I think you had to. All my 16-year-old friends were like, hey, man. So that was like, I experienced that just a little bit, but probably not to the extent that you did.
Yeah, the horror, in hindsight at the time, I mean, I'm overall, in most cases, I start out as a fairly naive person and go into it with, doe eyes and so forth. But I worked, when I worked at the video store, I worked at United Parcel Service. And so the United Parcel Service guys would always be like, we did a whole show on our podcast called Disney and a Porno. And so they would want a Disney for their young child and a porno. And so then they would want me to set aside a Disney and a porno. And, I always thought that when I was working there, they should have done a promotion called Disney and a Porno. They never did, but
probably for obvious reasons. And again, they would have to tag it euphemistically, so the alliteration wouldn't work out anyway as a promotion.
The funny thing was they'd always come back in the wrong box, and we had to be diligent on all Disney movies to make sure that there wasn't a porno in there.
Yeah, and that's really funny. Yeah, the funniest thing that probably happened to me at Blockbuster is like we would get I think Boys Don't Cry, that movie with Hilary Swank.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good movie.
It is a great movie.
Yeah, but it became one of the hottest rented movies when I was working there. It was a big, Oscar contender and all that. And one day the box comes back. We open it up, and it's a porn tape with, very alliterative title. And I can't say. I'm sure even if this were even if this were on HBO or if this is uncensored or whatever, I still would not say it. But I was shocked by it as a very naive 16, 17-year-old. And so it came back. And what I was surprised about is that the customer called about 2 hours later and said, "I think you have my tape.
Yeah.
Can I come and get it from you?" And it's like, why would you? It's like
they probably paid a pretty penny for that.
Maybe so. I don't know. But the funny thing is that when they showed up, like we had taken the tape and we had put it back in our manager's office, and we didn't tell our assistant manager that the customer was coming back in to retrieve it. Uh-huh. And so when they showed up, we had to say. They said, I believe you have my copy of, and they actually said the title of the name of the video, which was so funny to me. Yeah. And she says, can you get it for me? So I had to go back into my assistant manager's office and knock on the door and hope that, because I knew what was going on. He was watching it. So
no.
yeah, because he was a perv.
Oh my gosh.
It was eventually, he was eventually fired a few months later for stealing Third Eye Blind CDs. But
that's terrible.
Yeah, but he personally brought it up. He took it out of the VHS and he brought it up to her and said, "I apologize, here it is." And she's like, "Did you watch it?" And she's like, "No, ma'am, that's against our policy." And so
against our policy.
No.
The funny thing is, so at the time that I was involved in this, I worked with a lot of women, and so it wouldn't be unusual for me to be the only guy in the building, right? And so then I would always have to do all that stocking, right? Mm-hmm. So all the pornos and everything, which I thought was rather sexist, but I don't blame them. But even at the time, I'm like, well, but it was, I had to go put the tags out for the pornos because they did not want to go in there. Yeah. And I don't blame them. I didn't blame them at the time either. I just would tease them. But it was a very weird, situation. I mean, if you think about it nowadays, that would not fly. You know what I mean?
No. They would be equitable, make everybody stock the pornos.
Well, no, I don't think they just wouldn't have it. I mean, it would not be.
Probably not.
It would not be the norm, and that was the norm, and it was so strange.
Right.
And it. I don't know if it's better or worse now because it's so freely available, right? Pornography.
Right.
But I mean, the people who are coming in for pornography were not shy about talking about it, and unfortunately, they always engage me in conversation. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't, and still am not really a person that enjoys pornography.
Yeah.
Right. That's not my. I would rather watch Jurassic Park. I'm still a 12-year-old kid.
It is. No, I mean, it is amazing, like how, like, in order to, I mean, it wasn't like now where it's like you have incels, or you just have people that just are shut-ins, that just sit in their houses all day and they can get everything they want. Like back then, if you were a pervert, you still had to be social. It wasn't like, you had to,
pervert.
Yeah, you had to do it. You had to go out there and engage with the public, and maybe eventually, something might happen for you.
Right.
And, right. So
yeah, it was bizarre.
I know. I don't get. There's a video I played on my show this week from 1990, which was a videotape called "Flirting with Magic," which is this guy, this magician, Michael Jeffries, who teaches men how to build confidence in themselves by approaching women, you know, by performing magic for them and doing sorts of magic tricks to kind of just like, you know, spark a conversation. And it's like the most anachronistic funny video, and I just feel so sorry for anybody who rented it back in 1990, because it's just basically a training manual on how to be like the one guy in the bar that gets kicked out immediately, or that everybody distances. So it's basically like the 1990 equivalent of those guys who come to Halloween parties today dressed as like a free mammogram, you know.
Right.
It's
oh god,
right,
yeah.
But at the same time, at least like, see, like there was this like social conceit until fairly recently in our history, that in order to you know, meet in order to like meet women and hopefully have sex with them, like you would have to, there was a barrier to entry, which was called conversation. You had to actually, you know, you had to get them to a point. And I'm so incredibly relieved and happy that I met my wife before that became the norm now. Like the conversation and like going and meeting people in public is not, I don't believe it's a thing anymore. I don't, like, as a
really, you don't think so?
I think, I mean, I think to a degree it is accidentally, maybe, like, but I don't think people intentionally go to things anymore to like meet to meet and hook up, and like especially hook up, like, you know. I just think it's too damn easy for them now. Like, I mean, I have a friend who is, you know, in his 40s and he's single and all that, and that's what he does, and it's totally fine. It's like there's no judgment at all, but I mean, it's like there's it's completely, I think, different than it was just like 10 years ago now, where like,
really?
Dating apps, and not only that, but just hookup apps, like apps that are just like proudly billing themselves as like, let's hook up, you know, are just they're the stigma has been released. It's like, you know, so yeah,
that's weird.
I know I've got a fun porno story though for you, and I know that we don't want to spend the entire, but this
yeah, we got onto the topic. I was going to work my way off of, but go ahead. Let's say this.
No, I think we can do this. I think we can work our way off of that topic by going further into it. So it's like, you know, it's like you can go further into it and then get out of it.
Okay.
So we were talking before we started recording about my last name, which is like very unusual, and I do have a porno movie credit. Actually, I was not in this movie, but it's like my last name is very unusual, and it's usually the first thing that people notice about me, and it's never made conversation like hard at all in my entire life, because it's the first thing that you hear when I introduce myself to you. And like my friend Vince, who I actually haven't seen in a while, and I talked about him on a recent show that I did, like is in LA, and he's an actor and all that. And I think years ago he sort of knew this adult film entertainment producer, and I think that they like as a practical joke, he sort of gave them my name, and they put my name in the credits of this movie. So I don't know if it was like a sub for like a guy who was doing the movie and was too embarrassed to put his name on it. But
he's like, yeah, I'll take that one. We're going to give you 5 choices. Here they are.
Exactly. So, you know, it doesn't come up on the first page of Google, so that's good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, well, it's not buck naked if you're thinking that.
It's not. No, it's not the George Costanza thing. No, it's not. But anyway, but I kind of got you out of the porno topic by talking about my last name, so you can. Ask me.
I didn't expect. It just so I didn't realize that we had this kind of similar experience, and so Anyway, if you have that experience. And you meet anybody, they will talk about it. It's just inevitable. I mean, because it's such a weird part of the job at that time that you had to deal with, you know. And typically, like yourself, I was young, you were young, and so that's not norm, right? So you talked about going to church lock-in. I went to church lock-in, and you know, that's not the world of pornography. So,
no.
Well, I should say that other way. It is the world of pornography, but when you're 12, it's not the world of pornography.
Nobody talks about it. Exactly.
Because they would be the ones that would come through and get the movies, and you'd be like, "Oh, really, Mr. McGillicuddy?"
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway,
Yeah.
so but you're a film guy, right? And so am I, and you've done some things and so forth over the years, and I think, well, actually, there's a weird connection between the two of us currently. Not, it's very loose, so don't it's not too close. So you worked for an original, I think, if I recall correctly from listening to things over the years, did you work for a VJ, or at least were in close proximity with one of the original VJs of MTV?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I saw his ex-wife the other day. She, Jan, she run into her all the time. Yeah, Hunter, what's his name? Alan Hunter.
Alan Hunter, yes.
Yeah. Alan Hunter's from Birmingham, and I don't think he's living down here anymore.
No, he lives in St. Louis.
Oh, does he really? Oh,
yeah.
Is that right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the connection. So I don't work for him or anything, but
well, there you go.
He lives here in St. Louis, and he does a syndicated thing out of his house.
Yeah, he works for XM still, does it? Or
I think
Sirius
so,
or whatever it's called now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he does regular hosting on like the 80s channel with the other VJs. Right. Yeah, I think they're all still alive, except for the one that died early.
JJ died.
Right.
And I don't know if Nora Blackwood died.
Dina Blackwood. No,
Dina Blackwood. Yeah.
She's still around. I think I haven't had Sirius since COVID happened, because when COVID happened, there was no reason to have it anymore. But I seem to remember. Yeah, Alan Hunter was still on there last I listened. But yeah. He was a big fixture in Birmingham for a while. He opened this arts venue a few blocks away from my house called Workplay. In I want to say 1999, and it recently got bought out. He gave up his interest in it long ago, but it recently got bought out, renovated by another group, and it for a while it was like Birmingham's only major like production space where you can that had big sound stages on it, and it had a bar and like a concert venue, and that was where like the sketch comedy group that I was in college would perform. And so, Alan Hunter was just a big deal here, and his former wife, Jan, does a lot of theater, or has done a lot of theater over the years with my wife. Mm-hmm. So, it's a small town down here, but I had heard that he left. I didn't know where he went to, and I guess
he's doing. At least last I heard, he was here in town, still doing his show, except out of his house now because of everything, and
just like Howard Stern. Yeah. When Howard Stern started doing shows out of his house, like everybody did.
Yeah, that was the end of that, right?
Yeah, it's so sad, isn't it?
It is. It really. I mean, I
radio.
think. Yeah, I mean, podcasts are great, and you and I have been involved in that for a long time. Yeah. But I mean, it's not quite the same as old. Radio through the 70s and the 80s and early 90s was really at the peak, right? That was the peak of radio.
I certainly grew up with like a very romantic idea of what it looked like. And I don't know, watching movies like FM and seeing like WKRP in Cincinnati makes me think that it was every bit as romantic as we're led to believe it was.
Yeah.
It just looked like a very special kind of where it was like every radio station like in town kind of was sort of able to do their own thing and kind of serve the community, and that's what I love the most about it. And they come up with their own promotions, like the WKRP Cincinnati episode where they drop the turkey and and all that, and I wish when it was around could have appreciated it more. We always get so annoyed by the things that we're familiar with. But looking back now, where you listen to radio now and it's just 3 companies that own everything, and
iHeartRadio.
Yeah, there's just no individuality to it. There's no there's no connection with the personalities, and also like nobody's really listening to them anymore at all. I mean, I don't know. I find it weird that just wherever you are in throughout your day, you just really need to hear like Chicago, and you just know that you're going to turn on the radio and hear it. It's just so, it's so bizarre to me, but yeah, like I hate it so much. And again, I think a lot of it was killed. I think a lot of it obviously was killed by, podcasting, which is what we do. But the only reason I think podcasting became so popular is that just people miss that connection with a host, with somebody. And
maybe
the radio just phased out, right?
I think, to me, I always thought it was the conglomeration. So conglomeration happened before radio peaked. And when the conglomeration of all of it, one company owning all kind of a situation, it got rid of, kind of the small town radio station, and it got rid of, you had local celebrities, and then it got rid of local celebrities for more, regional or national celebrities. And I think, unfortunately, and I'll predict here, that's what's happening a little bit to podcasting, only in the sense of the high ranked people, right?
Yeah.
It's homogenized, right? It's becoming homogenized. This is so, and everybody's going to be, everybody's going to turn off at this point, but hopefully not. But, I've been doing this for 25 years now. This is the 25th year. And I'm looking at it over this base, this time period, and I'm watching it, coagulate into a lump of vanilla. And that's not what it's supposed to be. And so we have, the good thing is there's no controlling interest of the whole business,
right?
Like there was in radio, where you actually had to have governmental permissions, right? But that may end up coming. I was talking to somebody recently, I guess in Canada, they're trying to put restrictions on podcasts.
Really?
We were talking about that. I was not aware of this, but
what kind of restrictions are you talking about?
Like FCC type stuff, to where you decency standards.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Right, and I mean, not that that's necessarily bad. We just went to talk about pornography being weird, but it is not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be open and free and Wild West, and you can have a couple of bros talking about whatever, and then you have a couple of intellectuals talking about the latest publication. So the width and breadth of everything is what we love about it. I think the problem is then with all the new people coming on, all they know is the names. Anyway, that's I'm going to get off my soapbox.
No, you're absolutely right. And no, you're right. And it is tough. Like, again, I've been doing this off and on, very scattered since 2010. And you've been doing it very consistently since 1999. Right. I mean, when you started doing podcasts, before it was podcast, when you started doing internet radio, I mean, I was a sophomore in high school working at Suncoast.
Thanks,
That's how
Mike.
long you've been doing the show. I'm sorry, but it's like impressive. It's so. I mean, we're talking to the original one. I mean, honestly, and talking about like MTV. Like I know Adam Curry gets a lot of the
credit.
The credit, but I mean, it's like all he managed to do was essentially just amplify it and kind of put a name to it.
He marketed it. He's the Steve Jobs of podcasting. Essentially, he was like Jobs. Jobs was not he was a creative person, but he was not an engineer. Steve Wozniak was the engineer to make the computer. Steve Jobs was the guy who connected marketing wise with people and sold it. On podcasting, Dave Weiner, he wrote RSS, and Adam Curry sold it. And but he was also the more known name. So
and that's always the way it works. Did you see that documentary that HBO did recently about MoviePass?
No, but I gotta watch it.
MoviePass is the same exact thing. Like these two guys came up with the idea, and they spent 10 years trying to sell it. And they had this benefactor who's just giving them money finally say, I can't give you guys money anymore unless you bring on this CEO. And of course the CEO came in and took all the credit for it, ended up tanking it within 1 year. But I know that's off the topic, but I know what you mean though. Like when we when we talk about podcasting, because we're so like hooked into it, we just have, again, like with Frank Evernora, like doing this since 2003, like we've all seen just the promise of it in the beginning. And it's hard to talk about it in a way that's not like doomsday-ish or philosophical or whatever, because it's like you see the same thing, because podcasting was gone. It was dead except for like us. And then Serial came out in like whenever it was, 2012. And then every show now had to be like Serial. And then
And
Art Marin's What the Fuck podcast came on, and then suddenly every show had to have a guest. No offense.
No, that's fine.
But and like, I'm not even against that. Like, I mean, even before What the Fuck, like I remember having guests on in the very beginning. And like I remember there was this guy on NPR that I had listened to a story of, and I liked him so much that I reached out to him, and surprisingly he agreed to talk to me. So I did an interview with him, but that was now 13 years ago, 14 years ago. So it just was like, this kind of explosion now where it's like, if you tell people you do a podcast, they ask, oh, what on? Right. It's like just this thing about the niches, that everything has to be about 80s movies, or it needs to be about Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. Or I saw a podcast today that was like, we're reviewing all of the Fast and the Furious movies. And like, I'm not judging all that. Like, obviously there's an audience for that, but it also is sort of just exhausting, because the way that I saw the possibilities of podcasting back in 2004 and 5 was that finally we can kind of do this old style radio thing where anybody can have a platform and they can talk about whatever they want. And it's like, of course, one of my favorite movies ever, I think, is to all people who do something like that, is Pump Up the Volume.
Oh,
and, we like listen to Christian Slater at the end of that movie, sort of
Pirate Radio.
Yeah, Christian Slater at the end of that movie just inspires everybody to create their own pirate radio station and do what he does. And so, that's what you sort of see the possibilities as. And then in 2024, it's so, there's something like, 400 million podcasts. Somebody just did a count or an estimate. I think they had to use like finite mathematics or something to figure out how many podcasts there were in the world.
Right.
And, you could travel to here and Mars back about, 500,000 times before you listen to them all. And
between 2 and 5 million is the numbers that I've heard consistently.
Right. Okay. So that's less, but than I said, but it's
like, you're being facetious. So
I was, I think I was, I don't know. But yeah, it's like everything now about podcasting is about search engine optimization. And if you don't put something in those tags that people are going to like find, are going to be looking for, then you might as well just be sort of screaming into the void. And
interestingly enough, I think I actually had a conversation with somebody else who does a show, and we were talking about that, and he was doing the on the fly, he was doing some calculations. Because we were having a conversation. There's this thing called Chartable. I don't know if you're familiar with Chartable.
No.
So Chartable it's like the charting. It's one of the charting systems for, it wants to be the Nielsen of podcasting, right? Chartable does. There's more than one, but Chartable's one of them. And I was talking to him. I said, because over the last 2 years, I've been on this whole kick about guesting, and I was guesting on his show. And I was telling him, I said, it's interesting because out of all the shows I've guested on, your show was the only one that's listed on Chartable. And the funny thing is, your show and my show are the only two that I've ever encountered on Chartable of the people I've ever talked to.
Oh, wow.
And so he's like, really? And so he was not as into it, but he goes, you know what? And he started doing these, I don't know if it was right or not. I just was like in the moment, right? And he says, basically, if you get 3 listens, chances are you're going to chart.
Is that right?
Yeah, because that, I mean, there's people that get millions of listens and everything, but the way the long tail works is that, because the chart goes to, I can't remember what the number, but a chart goes, down tens of thousands, I think. But anyway, he's like, then if you get a few listens a month, then you're going to chart. And so I'm like, well, what are all these people? Because they all say they get all these listens.
I know.
and they're not anywhere uncharitable. And so we had this kind of little discussion about that. And that wasn't that I was, it wasn't a brag or anything. It was just an observation because I've never, at least to this point, I mean, up to now, and maybe in the future, who knows, been really concerned about any of that stuff. The point to me was creation.
Yeah.
Right? I love to create. Like you and I are talking right now, we're creating something. And Miles and I each week create something that has never existed.
Right.
And that's what, to me, it's all about. It's just, for me, I think for us, at least, Miles and I, it's that we've been creating for so long that it's everywhere. Right. And I don't mean that as in any kind of.
No, you're right. Brag. As you've been, I've been thinking about this lately in several ways. Every time I start, doing the podcast again, and right now I'm in a pretty prolific period right now. I'm managing to kind of create things on time every week, and I always like that. But for so long, it's just been so hard for me to do that because of my teaching schedule and just other professional responsibilities. But it's something that I always come back to. And one of the ways I think about it is that, follows. It's great for people to follow you, and it's great for people obviously to comment, to actually prove to you that they listen to the show and all that. But I think it's like we're such a metrics driven culture. And I was thinking about the way that my wife does theater, for instance. She does, it's like you were saying, she does a show and then it's done. And if you didn't come see that show, then you can't talk to her about it. It's like that you can't talk to anybody. And it's like she is sharing that experience in that moment with something like 200 people. And that experience will never happen again. So in a way, that's kind of like a way that I think about it, is that at the end of the day, it's just like utter creativity. The ultimate art of act of creation is just to do it and not to think about it afterward. And in a way, it's kind of like the Tibetan monks or something, who will create these intricate patterns and then they'll just burn them. Right.
Right.
And, And so, I don't know if I'm
getting very To Live and Die on LA all of a sudden here.
Oh yeah. I love that movie so much. Yeah, and that's absolutely what's his name? Willem Dafoe in that movie. That's what he does.
Yeah, that's what he does.
Yeah. And I mean, it's again, we can get very philosophical about that. William Friedkin loves to get philosophical in his movies, but I mean, that's the ultimate thing about money, right? It's you get it and you spend it, and there's that anything after the moment where you spend that money is just going to be downward until you get some more money, right? So, and that's what I feel. It's I just finished a major, writing project where I worked for a year on writing about one book. And it was so weird because I had to go before a committee of 3 people who said that they read my thesis. And I had to sit there and they asked me questions about it. And I talked about it for an hour and then it was done. And I was like, I just worked I told my wife, I just worked for a year and there's nothing. Right. So again, I think
you worked for a year for that moment.
Yeah. And it's if you concentrate too hard in any act of creation on the aftermath, then you're just going to be permanently disappointed. The fun part, the part that you get a rise out of is actually doing it. And then anything that comes after that. But I may only be saying that because of my podcast that I did this past week, I had 6 listens that I can register. So,
I think that's the truth though. I mean, that is really, the difference between a business that's creative and creative business. You know what I mean? So you're in the business of creating things that pay for themselves, then that's a whole different ball of wax than if you just want to create things.
Right.
And never the two shall meet most of the time. I mean, you get lucky every once in a while, but it's not going to happen with any consistency.
Yeah.
Or in the same way twice. And so that's why there's constantly people churning stuff out.
Yeah. My friend constantly cracks me up because whenever he talks about listening to my podcast, he's always like, yeah, your episode on this subject was great. He always mentions the one subject. It's this, and I was like, I did that episode 13 years ago. Have you listened to anything since then? But it's okay. I mean, but that stuck with them. And it's just like I was listening back to some of this week's exit ramp that we all did, and I think it was Nate in Wisconsin was saying this, or maybe it was you. I can't even remember. I'm sorry because I was like,
no, it's okay. I wasn't on for too long. So.
Yeah, I was driving, and I remember Nate in Wisconsin. I think said like, we've gotten to hear Mike Booty grow up on the Overnight Scape Underground.
Oh yeah, it wasn't me.
It wasn't you. I thought that was such a funny thing. And he said, like, he started mentioning a wave of shows that I did 10 years ago. And it was so weird because, like, you always do a show and you think that that's what's going to register with people. People are going to be like immediately hearing that and sort of thinking about it, talking about it, and commenting about it. But then you realize, like, oh my gosh, no, it's like that stuff that I said 10 years ago is still there. And if, people haven't listened to me in 10 years and that's like the only impression they have of me is like my 31-year-old self, talking about something that happened to me at work. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of a cool feeling in a way. It's like you really do in a weird way kind of feel immortal in that sense.
That is interesting. So yeah, but I mean, so just to speak to that a little bit, because you came into this, fairly young compared to like Frank and I.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we did. You had developmental steps, not like as a baby, but you were going through college and going through grad school and going through, jobs and everything where, we're kind of like, we're past all that by the time we got to this. And so before this even, came up. So yeah, that is interesting. And I think if, I suppose people who started blogging early on and stuck with it probably have that same kind of feeling.
Right.
But I always think the spoken word is the weird thing, and this is something that Frank usually talks about every once in a while during his show, is that so you have the writing of a blog, which is a certain thing, and you have people doing video and everything, right? But the spoken word to me seems more personal than either of those.
Yeah.
Because it is got the aspect of writing where you imagine what the person's talking about, but you get to hear them talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a connection, whereas when you're just reading the page, you invent the character.
Yeah.
So with the audio, you have a character and then you invent the scenario. And then video, you have it all there for you for the most part, depending on how, typically it's not always presented in the best way on kind of cheap video terms. And so therefore, everything that's going on because it's not, there's no aesthetic to it at all other than they just shoot themselves doing something.
No, it's a great thing. Yeah. I mean, back in, I have a quick little anecdote about that. So back in 2007, my first job out of getting my bachelor's degree, I got a job where I was working for a marketing company, and we were driving trucks all over the United States to essentially go to trade shows and just set up one of these like kiosks that housed people's companies' paper literature. Like, talk about a job that's completely outdated now.
Right.
And we would just sit there all day long. So it was basically just a year-long road trip where there was so little work involved. And once you were in these cities, you just got to hang out there for a week while the trade show was going on. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget being in New York I went to the Toy Fair convention.
Oh yeah.
And this is in February of 2007. And I wouldn't be. I've never asked Frank before, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was at that same convention because I know he likes to go to those things. But anyway, or Chad Bowers may have been there too. Actually, I think I did talk to him. I need to ask him. But anyway, off the point. And I'll never forget that I was there and I was reading a Gene Shepard book that I had. I was really, really, really into Gene Shepard at that time, and I was reading one of his books where, he tells all of his stories from childhood, growing up in the Midwest and all that. But the interstitial chapters are like him in New York. And so I was reading this book. And so he was describing some of the places in New York that I I was around, I was around Central Park and I was around Midtown and all that stuff. And I was reading these chapters and it felt so interesting. So that's the written word part of it. But then I was like listening on my iPod. I had downloaded a bunch of old Gene Shepherd episodes that somebody had released and put onto iTunes. And then I was listening to them and I was walking around Times Square, and he was talking about the same exact streets, the same exact places. He was describing Times Square at wintertime. And it felt so interesting to be, it really did feel like you were like a time traveler, to just be in like a single place that somebody was bringing alive to you over words. So I was reading about it and I was listening to it at the same time, but like it was the spoken word aspect that really brought the world up for me. It's like that just intimate feeling you hear, like somebody else telling you something like in person. So yeah, that was I just found that like an experience that's lived with me ever since. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So
now, do you think so? Having kind of done monologue style presentation for podcasting, do you think that's helped you as you went through school and then also as a teacher?
No, it's like definitely. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a teacher for a while, even as I was actually being paid to teach. So
that's what happened to everybody.
It's just one of these things that it's like education is something I kind of fell into because I just found that I just really I was very curious and love to investigate things and communicate them to people. That's not always what education is. Education is like teach this here now, but
right. Yeah.
So that's what that's what I didn't like about it. But but what the moments of teaching that I really do love is I do love being in front of students, and I do love the performative. There is a performative aspect of it where you're just there and you're trying to tell a story, especially if you're in the humanities, like if you teach history or English, you get to you get to tell students stories all day, and you get to talk about books and literature, which are the things that I love. And like doing that 8 hours a day, 9 months a year. And then again, you're also doing that in the summertime. There's always this like misnomer that teachers don't work during the summertime, and the teachers who need money do do nothing but work during the summertime. But like I'm teaching summer camp right now during the day and all that. But but like just being constantly in front of students makes you very comfortable with like your own voice, and gives you sort of naturally works out the beginnings, middles, and ends of stories. Like even if you don't know where you're going with the story, you can very often sort of say a word or phrase and pick up on it and be like, okay, that's the end of the story right now. I just need to work to that. And so, it's just talking constantly. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some times, and this is one of the reasons why I really cooled down on podcasting for 3 years when I got a high school teaching job. At the end of the day, I came home. I didn't want to hear my voice. I was so sick of hearing myself talk by the end of the day.
Tired of talking.
Yeah. And it's like if you're an administrator or anybody or anything like that, you just work with people all day giving orders. And, it can be like that. You're just tired of hearing your voice.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah. But I mean, also just like, again, I think it's just, I was driving around thinking today, like there's just been such a, movement of like teaching storytelling, like, like the Moth Radio Hour, or like, TED, conferences the past few years. And there's been, I guess all this kind of stems from Toastmasters, this whole industry that kind of, has wrapped itself around just public speaking and kind of capitalizing off of the basic human fear of being in front of people.
Right.
And I was thinking about that today, and I just kind of wince every time I see some kind of ad come across like Facebook or or just like come in and like pay $1,000 and we'll teach you how to tell a story. And that always gets me so irritated, because it's like at the end of the day, you learn by doing it, by just studying people who are really good at it. And I think for me, I was so lucky to like discover Gene Shepherd, who's just an absolute master storyteller. But also, like, in the beginning of like my show, I kind of wanted to do exactly Gene Shepherd's thing, and then I realized two things instantly: is that I didn't have nearly the kind of life experience that Gene Shepherd had. I just don't think that by 27 years old, which is when I started my show, you have nearly enough experiences to really make sense of. But I also realized that Gene Shepherd was talking to a very specific audience at a specific time. So I couldn't come up with catchphrases like Excelsior, make it sound natural in 2010. So so that's kind of where I started listening to Frank a lot, is the fact that like, this is a guy doing like, what if Gene Shepherd was still doing shows today? It would just still, it would be, adapting your voice and just like, being yourself, and just going out and living life and just having experiences that you can talk about and communicate. And that's what it was. So anyway, that was a long.
No, it's interesting
question. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's all free form. That's what it's all about here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about your, because you are a writer of sorts, and so I was going to ask you about your writing. Are you still writing? And if so, what are you writing about, or what do you want to write about? Probably more importantly.
No, I'm so glad you asked that, because like, this summer on my website, I've been posting some stories. I wrote these like back in 2020, so they're not new stories at all. And I don't write nearly as much as I podcast. I wish I did, but writing is one of those things that I take so seriously that I can barely do it without getting a panic attack. So it's very, very, very difficult for me to write. And even teaching writing is like this week I'm teaching students playwriting, and I'm not a playwriter, but it's basically like a way to essentially backdoor teach English to kids during the summer so that they don't lose some of their writing skills.
Right.
So I'm teaching playwriting.
It sounds better this way. We're playwriting. Yeah.
Exactly. So I found myself today telling kids, this is a group of 8-year-old kids. I was like, listen, writers are always writing. You don't have to just stop writing because you're not in this class. Writers are always writing, even when they're not physically typing. Believe me, writers are always writing, so much that the act of writing is just always in your brain to the point where it'll make you crazy. And I'm like, these are 8-year-olds.
The hardcore.
Exactly. And so I was like leaving the school today, and I was walking by a bunch of like a cluster of kids, and they were all at lunch. They were eating their sandwiches and writing their plays. And it was like, so,
you're like Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross.
I know.
Always be closing.
Always be writing. Exactly. So I was, but I don't know. I mean, it's I know I do enjoy writing, but there's also like a little bit of in-person what's it called, impersonator syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yeah,
imposter syndrome. Yeah, because like you're always just like writing is something that we consistently hear about. Like you need to do it every day.
Right.
And I just can't do it every day. It just exhausts my brain. But that being said, a few years ago during COVID, during lockdown, the summer of 2020, I found myself, as we all did, with like nothing to do all day. And so I did sit down and force myself that summer to write a new short story every week that I would read on my podcast. Mm-hmm. And that was a mistake to read it on my podcast, because I thought I would just be turning out like 3 to 5 minute stories, and some of them turned out to be something like 30 pages. Yeah. But I just ended up loving the material so much, and basically it's like kind of just stories about what happened in like this fictional small town in Alabama during the summertime, in let's say like 1990 or 91. I've never given it like a specific date, but I've always kind of wanted to like explore in writing, in like long form writing. what it was like to live in like a small town in Alabama in 1990. Because that was when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And like I was saying at the very beginning of the show, just the whole elder millennial thing. If you're born in the year, like if you're born in the two of a decade, I would say the 2 or the 3 of a decade, you really have like an uphill battle culturally, because like by the time you turn 7 or 8 years old and you suddenly kind of hit awareness of what's going on around you in a major way, you know, you're kind of like you're too old to experience the fun of the previous decade, and you're too young to sort of participate in the coming decade. And so what I'm trying to write these stories from the perspective of what it was like to sort of be an 8-year-old in like a small town that was a bedroom community of Alabama's biggest city. And so what did I remember about that? Well, I remembered that there was a healthy mixture of business people like my dad, who would be at they would buy houses in this small town because they were cheap, certainly much cheaper, much more affordable than buying a house in like the suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama. And then there was also, so there was a mixture of like the business class, and then there was a mixture of kind of like the kind of lower class people. I don't want to say lower class. That sounds really but believe me, like the true Alabama country people. You know what I mean?
Right. People who had been there before it was a bedroom community.
Exactly. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's like it's this kind of weird culture clash. But again, from the perspective of an 8-year-old, everybody seemed to get along really well. And that's kind of what I'm trying to write about, where it's like just this. And I'm going to write some more stories to add on to. I've got 5 that I've already finished, and I'm posting a new one tomorrow. I've posted 2 already. So I'm just trying to kind of write it from the perspective of like what an 8-year-old sees in like in this town. It's like a very specific kind of observation, if that makes any sense at all. So
no, it sounds interesting. I mean, and it's
right.
There's a whole group of elder millennials who grew up during this time, and that's the audience, right? So as well as other people as well. But I mean, they're the references and so forth are gonna hit real square with them. So
yeah, exactly.
That's the interesting thing. And then it's. But for you, it's a creative thing to do, and so then you get this, you get the creative pat on the back as you're doing it, and then you have something when it's done. So
again, it's just one of these things that I'm kind of writing, and I'm very, very satisfied and very happy with it. And I've gotten some nice feedback from like a couple of people who have read it. My wife's not one of them. She hasn't read it, but it's okay. She's busy.
You're married now. They don't really care what you're doing.
No, they don't. They don't. But I will say that my wife was the very first person who ever commented on one of my episodes that I did in 2010.
Oh,
so
really?
She did. Yeah. She was like the first commenter I ever
Were you
had.
married at that point?
No, I was not. No,
so.
that was before we even knew each other, really. So.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's
interesting.
Yeah, it was. So anyway,
so you got that.
Yeah. So that was nice. So the podcast kind of did very early on what it was designed to do, which was like help me meet women.
Really?
No,
that certainly wasn't my goal.
No. Yeah, it was. Yeah, no, I'm just joking. It was because I didn't have a girlfriend, so I needed something else to do with my free time. So, but besides go to the Blockbuster and rent porno tapes. But so we're trying to like bring them all back.
Yeah, we're looping it all around.
All the jokes, we're layering them. Yeah, but no, I'm gonna try and continue, to write some stories, coming up. I've got like several outlined, and what I'm hoping to do, honestly, is hopefully I'll get like maybe 10 or 11 stories, and I'll possibly put them together as a volume and do like a print on demand or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you published? I mean, even self-published. Have you published stuff for yourself, or even beyond that?
No, it's just been one of these things where I've never had anything that I've felt comfortable enough with to publish.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's just again, writing is one of those things that just I love doing so much, but I am like that perpetual like George McFly in Back to the Future, where it's just like covering all of his stuff. He can't take that kind of rejection.
I can't. Yeah,
I know.
People see it.
Yeah, and I mean, so I'm waiting, I think, for time travel to be invented. So like my future son, I guess I got to have a son first and go back and give me some confidence. So
well, I will tell you. It means nothing, but I will tell you, there's no reason to wait. Do even if it's just self-publishing, do it.
Yeah.
Get it over with, cross that hurdle, and then move forward from there. Because the more you wait, I mean, it's useless. Mm-hmm. It's wasted.
No, you're right. You're right. No, I know. And again, I'm constantly having like identity crises and all that. But the one thing that I'm very sure about is I do want to stick with literature and writing about literature. And that's kind of my chief goal, is that I just absolutely love research, which sounds, I know, like really boring to like a lot of people, but it's something that when I was that's the one reason why, like, I love it so much that I quit my job and went back to grad school full time, just so I could like sort of learn how to do it better. And, you know, and it just is one of those things where, you know, what ultimately fuels me is, you know, reading books and writing about books and reading about, you know, and reading people's essays and thoughts and opinions about books and all that, as well as other things like movies and all that. So I don't know. Anyway.
No, I would just encourage you. There's no time like the present, you know.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah. No, I've got it. I will let you know as soon as I've got a book out. This may be like the only author anybody's ever interviewed who hasn't written anything and published anything yet.
No, trust me, there's a lot of them out there.
Can you imagine like
several? Yeah.
Can you imagine like NPR, like Terry Gross being like, "We're interviewing Steve. Steve says that he's working on like a science fiction novel, and it'll probably be out sometime in his lifetime."
In the next millennial.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that Michael Crichton just got a new book published.
He's dead.
I know, he's been dead for 25 years. I think he died the year that you started doing your show. That's
I love Michael Crichton.
Yeah.
But he, that goes to Jurassic Park as well.
Yeah.
I think they had manuscripts and they've, you know, somebody's come in and doctored them up.
It's, no, my mother-in-law texted me. She said it was James Patterson, who's like, I think, released it, and I was okay. Wow, James Patterson, that's okay, but but I think it was like also his wife, and this is a major synchronicity the other day, because his wife, who wrote Michael Crichton's wife, who wrote Twister with him, you know, movie Twister, posted. I just discovered this like not too long ago, and I posted something on like Substack the other day about the show that she was a star of, and then like a few hours later, my mother-in-law said like Michael Crichton's wife was just being interviewed on NPR about his latest novel. So anyway, so,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that yet. So
yeah. So,
but Mike, I think we're going to wrap it up. We're going a little over an hour, if that's okay. But it's been fun talking to you. And I put up here where folks can find some stuff at mikesbonfire.substack.com. We didn't even touch upon half the stuff that I was thinking about in my head, but maybe we'll talk again.
I do a podcast called The Midnight Citizen. It drops every Saturday. So that's all.
Put that up there too.
Yeah.
And so listen to Mike, and then and we'll catch you again next time.
Definitely. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
All right, hang on just a second.
Yeah, I didn't know if you end the show right when I